Moses Tewksbury, Hannah Jack Thornton, Dunlap Furniture, Isaac Blaisdell, Daniel Chester French, and Amos Tuck French. Hello and welcome to another Chester History Moment. Today I'm going to bring you a bunch of what I call little snippets of Chester history because they're important, but I don't have enough information to do a whole video on. I'm going to begin with Moses Tewksbury, which was a famous cello maker. He lived on Walnut Hill, which is on Haver Road by the tall tower going into Hampshire. He lived there in the 1800s, and he studied and made cellos for the infamous cello maker 30 miles from here in Concord, New Hampshire, Abram Prescott. Let's go over and take a look at one of his cellos. Little did Moses know that his viols would end up in the best museums in the country. We are so fortunate to have this for our museum that you can come visit and see. And you wouldn't have to go all the way into Boston to the Boston Museum of Fine Arts to see one. It goes to show what a famous viol maker Moses was. Inside of all Moses Tewksbury's viols are his own label. It shows his name and that it was made in Chester, and here is a date of 1844. Moses Tewksbury is buried in the village cemetery in the center of Chester. I have gone around and around with the spelling of his name. Notice on his tombstone there's no E. But back in the 1700s, there were many, many mistakes for spellings on tombstones. In the 1700s, the carvers were not well educated. I go with the label inside of his viols because he had control of his labels. He had them written with an E where he did not have control over the spelling once he passed away. In the same area on Walnut Hill, Mary and Andrew Jack lived. I found that he was a warden for the Presbyterian Church in 1747. Their daughter Hannah was born in 1742. She married the infamous Declaration of Independence signer Matthew Thornton. I cannot find any birth records on Hannah, so I don't know if she was born in Chester, but at least I know from those dates that she lived here when she was 5 years old. How cool is that? The wife of the Declaration of Independence signer Matthew Thornton. There is a road that is called Jack Road by Field to Fork Farm. Was Andrew Jack named for this road, or rather was the road named for Andrew Jack? I don't know, and I don't know enough about Hannah being born here or living here, so don't repeat this information until it can be proven. I am standing at 96 Dairy Road in front of what is considered one of the Dunlap houses. The Dunlaps were famous furniture makers. Judy and John Pepper recently lived here, where John did a lot of the restoration work. And Judy made a scarecrow depicting the Dunlaps as chair makers. The tradition of furniture making was very strong in the Dunlap family. It continued with all the sons, grandsons, and great-grandsons. Major John Dunlap was the third of 5 sons. John, his father, Archibald, and all his brothers were farmers. They were skilled in joinery and cabinet making and chair making. His brother Samuel had a daughter named Sarah, and she was born in Chester in 1781. William, his brother, also had a daughter born in Chester, which shows that they stayed in Chester for a while through their early adulthood.
All of the Dunlaps served in the Revolutionary War. John was a major, and Samuel was a captain. John Dunlap moved from Chester to Goffstown, and then disassembled that house in Goffstown and totally moved it to Bedford, where he continued his fine furniture making there with his brothers William and Samuel. Interestingly, many of their pieces are made of today's sought-after bird's eye and tiger maple, but back then was not a popular wood to use and was often used only on the inside of furniture. This chest of drawers, which is in the Chicago Art Institute, was made by John and Samuel Dunlap. Another is in the Winterthur Museum in Delaware, as in many other art museums throughout the whole country. You can see these pieces in the Currier Art Gallery in Manchester, New Hampshire. The Dunlap's father, Archibald, died in 1754 in Chester, and both mother and father are buried in the village cemetery.
Something that I did not realize was, until I read the book Dunlap Cabinet Makers, written by a descendant, Donald Dunlap, was that John Dunlap's brothers, Joseph and James, both built the pews on the Chester Meeting House, the original one, in 1765. It was not this meeting house because this was built in 1773. It would have been the original meeting house across the street at the Civil War monuments. James and his brother that built the pews in the meeting house also signed the association test. They were against the British, and they put their lives at risk by signing this for their colonies. Blaisdell was another signer of the association test, as you can see from the historic marker on Chester Street. Let's go up Chester Street and see where Isaac Blaisdell lived. I am standing in front of what is called the Clockery. Isaac Blaisdell built this house in 1785. It is now owned by Carrie and Chris Haddock, and that's why she puts a scarecrow out in front of her house every year.
Oh, how I love the historic scarecrows. Here is Isaac Blaisdell holding his clock in front of the Clockery. This is an old postcard of Isaac Blaisdell's home, now called the Clockery. The addition was used as Tompkins' store. Around 1905, Tompkins' store was torn down to build a two-story addition by Ellen French Vanderbilt. She was the sister of Amos Tuck French, who lived across the street, and the wife of Alfred Vanderbilt. Yes, the Vanderbilt that died on the Lusitania and owned the breakers in Newport, Rhode Island. I would like at another date to do a video on this house, which is just full of so much history.
Okay, I'm standing here in the Historic Society room in front of our Isaac Blaisdell clock. This clock was donated to the Society by Linda Witherill. It has this beautiful medallion on the front of the clock. It says Isaac Blaisdell, Chester, New Hampshire, which certainly identifies it as a Chester wonderfully alone. It's a tall case in tiger maple, 30-hour movement. It's in really great shape. We have this massive single lead weight that's part of the mechanism to wind it. To properly use this clock, we would have to put a hole through our floor and allow that weight to actually go down through the floor to run a full 30 hours.
The spelling of his last name, Blaisdell has been butchered for years, and I must say I'm the biggest offender. He was also a silversmith, so he made his own name tags. Notice there is no I and no double L. To the left of Isaac Blaisdell's clockery is a cellar hole of Daniel French's home. He was the grandfather of Daniel Chester French, the famous sculptor of the Minuteman statue in Concord, Mass., and more importantly, the Lincoln Memorial. Daniel spent all his summers at his grandfather's home in Chester. He built a studio in his home in Stockbridge, Mass., and he named it Chesterwood. He designed the living room to replicate his grandfather's living room here in Chester, right down to the moldings. He filled the living room with many items from his grandfather's house, and on the stairway, when I visited Chesterwood, I found an Isaac Blaisdell clock. His home and his studio are now open to the public as a museum.
I'm always telling people how Daniel Chester French took his own name, middle name because he didn't have one, as Chester because he loved Chester so. I found this fabulous account in a book of him talking about it. In childhood, I often came here to visit my grandmother, and in boyhood, my long summer vacations were spent here. I became familiar with all its natural attractions of fields and woods, blueberry pastures. It was at this time I tucked Chester into my name because of my love of the place, not having been given a middle name. The town of Chester is still very dear to me, not only because of my happy associations with it, but because it was the birthplace of my father and my mother. The house built by my grandfather in 1800 is gone, and those who were the older generation in my boyhood have passed away also.
Across the street from Daniel French's house was a house called Journey's End. It was bought by Amos French. He grew up in New York, Tuxedo Park, and Newport, Rhode Island. He graduated from Harvard. He was in banking and finance in New York City. Later in his life, he became interested in his family's New Hampshire history and started purchasing homes and land in Chester. His sister was Elsie French, who once married Alfred Vanderbilt. His grandfather was B.B. French, which I speak often about, being born in Chester and Lincoln's confidant. His granddaughter married John Jacob Astor. He was elected to the building committee for the New Hampshire Historical Society building. His mother, in 1911, bought him Lord Timothy Dexter's house for his birthday. The French family had the first artesian well in Chester and a water pump which served all their homes on Chester Street. The Historical Society now has this water pump in its possession. He brought many famous people into Chester, princesses and baronesses. He was very good to the town of Chester, giving to the Wilcom Townsend Fund, the library, all the churches in town. He donated the first flagpole in front of Stevens Memorial Hall. He planted 100 maple trees along Chester Street. He gave land to Chester to enlarge the village cemetery and the land which was used for the athletic field at Chester Academy. He also gave the elaborate iron fence at the village cemetery, which came from a home he had in Newport, Rhode Island. At his death in 1941, the Dexter house went to his son Stuyvesant, and he is buried in the village cemetery in the French plot.